Where is the French Revolution in the book of Revelation then?
Which chapter I just read? Verse 13.
When you first come across this idea, you might, like me, scratch your head and say, really? The French Revolution, the book of Revelation, this is a little bit wacky, a little bit strange. How did you get that there? Well, we've got to go to Revelation chapter 11. And I very briefly told you what I thought Revelation chapter 11 was about. It's about what it's like to live under the dominion of the beast system. And you might want to notice a parallelism between chapter 11 and 12 and 13. So in chapter 11, there are two periods of time mentioned. In verse 2, there's a period called 42 months. See that in chapter 11, verse 2, 42 months. And then in chapter 11, verse 3, there's a period called 1,260 days. So they're both the same length of time, but they're designated one by months, one by days, and that suggests that they're not exactly the same periods of time, although they're of equal length. When you go to chapter 12, verse 6, you'll see there the period of time, 1,260 days. Yeah? When you come to chapter 13, you see there the period, verse 5, of 42 months. Right? So, just notice that in chapter 11, there are two periods, 42 months, 1260 days. In their reverse order, chapter 12, 1260 days, chapter 13, 42 months. So, those two epochs are mentioned as epochs in chapter 11. They're expanded in chapter 12 and chapter 13, but in reverse order. Right, interesting. And that reverse order gives the sort of focus to what? Well, my suggestion to you is that the very, very centre, the meaningful centre of the book of Revelation, linear as it is, because it's an unfolding picture through time, is actually centred on Revelation 11, 15 to 19. And that very, very famous, wonderful verse, the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever, is the centre of Revelation. The symmetrical centre of Revelation. That is what we're waiting for. That's what it's all about. That's what we're yearning for. And chapter 11, so this side of it, chapter 11, is about what it's like to be a witness against those systems of evil, and this side is what it's like to be those systems of evil. Right? So you can see the same periods of time have been spoken about, one from the perspective of the persecuted, the other from the perspective of the persecutor. And the only thing that's going to make any difference ultimately is when the seventh angel sounds and the Lord Jesus Christ brings that third revolution to play. So if chapter 11 is about the persecuted, those who witness against, those who protest against the cruel dominion of this false Christianity, we could go into the detail, but we don't have time. But it's a very, very convincing story. And again, the first time I looked at this for myself, in fact, Paul Billington asked me to write an article on chapter 11 of the French Revolution, and I have to say my first reaction was, do I really believe it? By the time I got through to verse 13, I was absolutely convinced. Absolutely convinced, because it can be nothing else. And the clue is this, right? Verse 13. Remember, where we've got to, the pagan Roman Empire has been converted to a form of Christianity. The Christian Roman Empire in the West has been judged by the barbarians coming in. set up a sort of Roman enterprise, but only for a short time. And chapter 13 has told us that the beast of the sea re-emerges, the eighth head comes back to life. And the saints are suffering. Right? The system is making war with them. Then verse 13 says, chapter 11, the same hour was there a great earthquake, and the 10th part of the city fell. I think, well, what's a 10th part? What could a 10th part mean? The city of Rome, what would be a 10th part of the city of Rome? There was a Caesar who extended the boundaries of Rome throughout the empire and said that anybody who lived in the Roman Empire was a citizen of Rome, therefore liable to pay tax. And that's the way he raised a lot of money. But if you take the empire and the city to be one and the same thing, then what would a 10th part of the empire signify? That one of the 10 horn powers that have emerged would be the place of a revolution, an earthquake. So we're looking for a revolution which shakes the world in one of the 10 kingdoms that stand upon the Roman earth. Or you mean the Austrian Revolution? No. The Belgian Revolution? The Luxembourg Revolution? No, you don't. It's just so well known. And this was one of the persecuted, one of the Huguenot Protestants, Jacques Philpot, writing in 1685, a book called The Elucidations on the Apocalypse of St. John. 1685, 100 years before the French Revolution, 100 years before the French Revolution. And he says this, look, it is a sure thing that earthquakes in the scriptures mean great changes occurring in the nations. There will be a surprising change in France. The world will be glad except the clergy, the monks and the Jesuits. I take it for granted that France is one of the 10 horns of the beast, one of the 10 kingdoms, which will be formed according to Daniel out of the debris of the Roman Empire. The French monarchy was established upon the ruins of the French Empire and grew at the same time as the Bishop of Rome. I take it for granted that France is part of the city Babylon that is of the Papal Empire. Why should there be any hesitation in concluding that this 10th part of the city which shall fall is France? Now that's an amazing thing for two reasons. One is, it's based on scriptural interpretations, based on understanding the symbols of Daniel and what is an earthquake, what could a 10th part be, right? And because he doesn't know which of the 10 yet, but he looks and says, well, which is it likely to be? Why would one of them be so important? Probably because they're very important in terms of papal dominion. Well, that's going to be France. So I take it then that France is going to fall. They didn't know when, not in this quote, but he knew 100 years ahead of the event. Isn't that impressive? Well, Peter Jure, who was also a Huguenot, quoted by Brother Graham Pierce in his book, Which Interpretation, writing in 1687, did calculate the date of the French Revolution from Revelation chapter 11. That is just a stunner. You know, Brother Thomas is criticised for a complicated interpretation after the event to fit it in. Now, 100 years before, a European Protestant, French Protestant, used the same approach to predict accurately the date of the French Revolution. How about that? It's a bit of a test, isn't it? So he said, the 10th part of the city, symbolically Babylon, the 10th part of the city, which here fell, will at some future time appear to be the Kingdom of France, where a revolution will take place about the year 1785, and a separation from the papacy follow, where the names of monks, nuns, Carmelites, Augustines, Dominicans will perish forever, and all those vain titles and memorial bearings which serve for ornament and pride shall vanish, and brotherly love make all men equal. He even anticipated the emergence of human rights from that revolution. I know a brother in Canada who has a copy of this book, and yes, I held a copy of this book. It's a genuine book written 100 years before the French Revolution. So that is, to me, incredibly convincing, because it makes total sense that that's what Revelation chapter 11 is speaking about. But the French Revolution then is verse 13 of chapter 11. And its aftermath is described in chapter 16. Because the French Revolution was, it's not just the storming of the Bastille, it's not just the cutting off the heads by Madame Guillotine of the nobility of France. There was an uprising against the Catholic Church, and its repercussions rumbled through Europe in a dramatic way. And the 7 vials really target that Catholic system, the Holy Roman Empire, which was so obnoxious to God. And this is just a summary table of those vials, which you might want to study at some point in the future. And you can see by this Christadelphian traditional view, which I think is correct, that the French Revolution brings about war on the sea, war in the mountains, war against the Austrian Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, and the end, the terminal end of the Holy Roman Empire. I've got a date of 1806 in my Bible as the end of the Holy Roman Empire, but some of these dates you can obviously check. So the first 5 vials really are the consequence of the French Revolution, the Napoleonic Wars, and what Napoleon did ultimately was get rid of the Holy Roman Empire. Right? And he did it in a very interesting way, because he crowned himself. Do you remember this, don't you? That, see, the Pope had crowned Charlemagne, which made the Pope the kingmaker. And the Pope thought he was going to do the same for Napoleon. Instead, Napoleon goes, I love that. I love that, right? Doing away with the Pope. And the Holy Roman Empire came to an end. It was replaced temporarily by the French Empire, and then the Germans tried to create the Second Reich, and then Hitler tried to create the Third Reich, right? And that was, it continued in different forms. But for that phase, the end had come. Then the 6th vial, what have we got? Verse 12, there's a different focus. The 6th vial, angel poured out his vial upon the great river Euphrates. So we've moved from the Western Empire to the Eastern Empire, to the river Euphrates. And the Turkish Empire is the target of verse 12, and the Turkish Empire was dried up, starting from 1820, thereabouts, right up until 1917. Right? 100 years ago, recently, celebrated the end of the First World War, the Balfour Declaration, General Allenby's walk into Jerusalem, the Turks' empire come to an end. Very interesting. We want to go into chapter, I'm going to come back, I'll probably come back to this a little bit. I'll just, time, I'm going to move on to looking more closely at the frog-like spirits, because chapter 16 is really important. Chapter 16 is Europe in the 1800s and the 1900s, right? And the river Euphrates dries up, and then appears in verse 13, 3 unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, out of the mouth of the false frog. And these 3 unclean spirits is the subject of this whole weekend. We've got to get a grip. So we've looked at how we get to there. Where do we get frogs in the Bible? Exodus chapter 8. So we've got to go back to Exodus chapter 8. But you know that all the, was Daniel, give us the, Daniel, the order of the plagues, please. What do those plagues all have in common?
They're against man.
They're all against
Man, gods of Egypt.
the gods of Egypt. Right? And the verse for that is Exodus 12, verse 12, which says, I will pass through the land of Egypt this night and will smite all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. Okay? So God has executed judgment against the Nile, against the flies, against the cows, against the lightning god, against all of them, right? And the firstborn, of course, was venerated as God manifest. There it was a god, son of the god. So the frogs were worshipped as gods. I think that's a bit odd. So when did they get worshipped as gods? Well, in Egypt. And if you look up the frog goddess, we've got scriptural permission to do this, haven't we? Because Scripture's telling us they're against the gods of Egypt. Right? And so you look at the gods of Egypt in the archaeological records, and you find her name was Heket. And she was a frog goddess with a frog-headed symbol. What did she symbolize? Life from the dead. She symbolized new life, new age. Very interesting. I just thought this was fascinating. This is the New Lewis Encyclopedia of Mythology. I had it on my bookshelf. I don't know why I bought it in the first place, but I thought I paid so much, I'm not going to throw it away. Anyway, I looked at Heket, and there she was. You know where she came from? How she was born? Out of the mouth of Ra himself. So these frogs, where do they appear in Revelation? Out of the mouth of the false prophet, out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast. Interesting, right? That's what their mythology said. So, in that sort of symbolism, what comes out of the mouth? Words, ideas. It's the teaching of the false gods of Egypt that were everywhere. That was the new thinking. That was the new birth. That was the new life. This is what Egypt had to offer. And what happened to those frogs? Stand. So let's just look at this. I know somebody looked at it in a lot of detail. But in Exodus chapter 8, we'll look at the frogs, which it says, verse 3, the river shall bring forth frogs abundantly, which shall go up and come into thine house, talking to the king, and into thy bedchamber, and upon thy bed, and into thy servant's house, and upon thy people, and into thy ovens, into thy kneading troughs. The frogs shall come up both on thee and on thy people, and upon all thy servants. So what would you say? What are the key features about these frogs then?
Everywhere.
They're everywhere. They're ubiquitous. That's the word, isn't it? You can't get away from them. Wherever you go, they are there. They can reach into every corner. What else?
Slimy.
What's that?
They're slimy.
They're slimy. No distinction of class. They're in the king's palace. They're in the servant's palace. There's an equality about their presence. They're indiscriminating. They don't stand on ceremony. They're universal. What else?
They affected the children of Israel as well.
Right?
The bedchamber would be on the top of the children
Right.
and the offspring.
So, look where they were. Bedchamber. The private parts of our lives. They're there as well.
Free to go
Take your
where
phone
they
into your bedchamber.
Yeah.
Anybody not take their phone into their bedchamber? Okay. Right, they get everywhere, right? You can't be without them. Into thy bed. Take your phone to bed. They're there. This influence is there day and night, in every room in the house, wherever where you go, whoever you are, constantly. And so verse 8 says, Then Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron and said, Entreat Yahweh that he may take away the frogs from me and from my people, and I will let the people go. And when they were taken away, of course it says they stank. They are a corrupting influence. Of course they got the symbolism of life. The frogs spawn masses of eggs and masses of life. And frogs jumping everywhere, and it's a symbol of fertility, and you'd want the goddess on your side if you were having a baby, so she's the patron saint of childbirth in Egypt, right? That's what she was. They prayed to her for a good childbirth. And so why would that symbol be used in Revelation 16? And that's one of the things we've got to ask. What is it about these unclean spirits? So what's a spirit? In verse 13 of chapter 16, what is a spirit? In what sense is it this unclean spirits? What are unclean spirits?
Attitude or behaviour?
An idea?
David, first of all, well, look back. In 1 John 4, verse 1, it says, Beloved, believe not every spirit, but try the spirits, whether they be of God. So it's teaching. A teaching was a spirit. It comes out, it's a breath. It comes out of your mouth. Now, go back into the Gospels. An unclean spirit was possessed a person who was behaving in a certain way. They had a demon. So this idea of an unclean spirit is of a person possessed. Person whose behaviour is under the command of a false teaching, and it's affecting their life and disabling them. So these unclean spirits, these thoughts, these ideas, these notions cause our behaviour to be disturbed and distorted. And these spirits are everywhere. That's what we've been led to. So what could it be? That all we got next slide. Oh yeah. Yeah?
Freedom, fraternity, equality.
That's it, you got it in 3. Right? Because what the French Revolution did, and no secular authority argues for this, what the French Revolution did was change the world from feudalism, from the concept of politics being in the hands of kings and emperors, to politics being in the hands of people. That people themselves, the masses, determine their own destiny. And once you unleash the forces, like all these frogs, once you take the lid off, they jump everywhere. You can't control them. And the cry of the revolution, right? Liberté, égalité, fraternité, or death. That was the cry, right? You either agree with us or have your head chopped off. That's what's it going to be? And it went from, the emperor, the Sun King, as the Pope, as supreme over everybody's life, to men being able to determine their own destiny, of course. Subject there to Robespierre and others, allowing you to live freely. The 3 frog-like spirits being a symbol of France is a secondary association. It's not the basis for identifying France and the French Revolution, the Book of Revelation. It's not. So I don't think it's helpful to start off with a flag with 3 frogs on it. I mean, that's really interesting, but it's not the beginning of it. The beginning of it, let's work our way through Revelation. Let's start by John, let's see where we go. We get through the seals. Yeah, that's pretty impressive. And then what happens? Oh, the empire. It's a revolution. Constantine changes. Okay, what happens now? The barbarians invade. okay, that's really interesting. What happens then? Well, you know, the empire re-emerges. So that's amazing. Then what happens then? With the witnesses, they're slain and they come back to life. And there's another revolution. That's the French Revolution. What happens next? Well, there's wars in Europe and we come up with the Turkish power. That dries up and the world is being made ready for Armageddon. Hey, that's where I am. That's where we get France, not because there's 3 frogs on a flag, but how interesting that there are 3 frogs on a flag. There is a picture of Clovis, Leroy Clovis, I don't know. Leroy Clovis. He's like a basketball player. And there he is getting baptized. Actually, small enough to get in a baby's spot. So the New Encyclopedia Britannica calls Clovis's conversion to the Catholic faith a decisive moment in the history of Western Europe. Right? So it's not as if you're picking a man with 3 frogs on his chest who's got nothing to do with anything, but he's got 3 frogs on his chest, so let's bring him in. Clovis was the beginning of France as a kingdom. Why he has 3 frogs on his chest, I really don't know, but he does. France, the symbol of France, from its inception, was 3 frogs. And you think, well, that's a bit weird. Are you sure, Brother Stephen? In 1996, Pope John Paul, on the last and controversial stop of a hectic visit to France, held a mass on the anniversary of a 5th century king, as thousands protested in Paris. So despite people protesting on the streets of Paris, you know, the yellow vests, they can be quite nasty, the Pope nevertheless goes to the anniversary of a man from the 400s. What happened in the 400s?
Dark Ages.
The barbarians started to invade Western Europe and break up the empire. Clovis was the Frankish king who started the 10th horn power that would be called France. And look what he's got on his chest. I just think, that's amazing. Why did the Pope go there? Why did the Pope want to remember Clovis? He even, well, it goes back, but this is Nobilissima Calorem Gens, the encyclical of Pope Leo XIII on the religious question of France, 1884. France, to our venerable brethren, the most noble nation of the French, says the Pope, besides many splendid achievements in peace and war, has deserved from the Catholic Church praise for special services. Having embraced Christianity at the initiative of its king Clovis, it was rewarded by this most honourable testimony to its faith and piety, the title of the eldest daughter of the Church. That's why the Pope went to celebrate Clovis's anniversary, because he became a Catholic when France became a country. And the Catholic Church said, thank you ever so much. You are the eldest daughter of the Church. And you see why it was so appropriate that the revolution should have taken place there. What an amazing thing. When John Paul II commemorated that Mass, he was also at the time writing to the President of the Republic, Mr. Jacques Chirac. And in writing to Jacques Chirac in 1996, he says, by accepting the Catholic faith, Clovis, in his own way, and according to the ideas of his time, was able to lead different peoples towards founding a single nation. It's one, Clovis is credited by the Catholic Church with forming one of those 10 horns. Now why, you'd think the Pope wouldn't want 10 horns, and he doesn't. But if he can have one of them as the eldest daughter of the church, he could be looked after by this French power, which is what the French did. That's why Charlemagne became the first Holy Roman Emperor, because the French man was looking after the Pope. It's quite amazing. And it turns out that the insignia of Clovis celebrated Clovis, not small print Clovis. Clovis, the Pope goes and celebrates Mass for. The Pope, the Clovis that the Pope writes a letter to the President of France about, has got 3 frogs on his chest. And we're expecting something to come out of the French Revolution that's got 3 frog-like spirits. I just think it's stunning. The tapestry, I don't know what travel to read this, but this is the picture I got. I couldn't get any other picture of the tapestry. But can you just see up here the shield of Clovis? Maybe you can't get this. 3 frog-like spirits. It's as if the brethren and sisters in Europe who have been suffering under the wickedness of this evil empire can see soldiers with 3 frog-like spirits. It's France. One day, there's going to be a revolution in France. And the spirits are going to come out from France into the mouth of the Pope, into the mouth of Europe, into the mouth of Russia, and going to bring the nations towards Armageddon. Because that's what we expect. What did the French Revolution do then? It's called, interestingly, the Permanent Revolution. In 1989, there was a 200-year anniversary, and a number of books were published. I bought a couple of them because I just liked the headlines on the books. You didn't have to read it because the headlines were so clear as to what the French Revolution meant. Look what it says. The renewal of mankind. What was Hecate, the goddess of? Renewing mankind, wasn't she? The goddess of renewing mankind. That's what she was. And it was a permanent revolution. These ideas didn't just come, change the world and then die away. I know Napoleon didn't last very long. He won the Battle of Trafalgar, And they won the Long War, didn't they?
Yeah.
Right? They won the Long War. The French Revolution was the beginning of human rights. The prime source, look at this, Egyptian concept of Hecate, the fountain spring of human rights in the modern world. When we look at Revelation 16, verse 13, we're looking at that, the forces which shape the modern world. They're frog-like, there's 3 of them. They come out of the time of the French Revolution, and they're described here in terms of human rights. So, but not just human rights, because some of these forces, once unleashed, are contradictory. Right? They're contradictory. Liberty and fraternity, sort of not natural partners, are they? Fraternity involves working with somebody else, with a group of people. Liberty, I do what I want. I do what I want, we work together. I do what I want, we work together. So you get liberty, and that was manifest in itself in individualism, in rights and so on. And fraternity, which manifested itself more in terms of nationalism. We've got to stick together. We are France. We've got to stick together. We are British. We've got to stick together. We are Welsh. We've got to stick together. We're the working class. We've got to stick together. We're the miners of the working class. Right? So you can see that liberty is sometimes in conflict with fraternity.
We have to work together as long as you do what I want.
That's right. So power struggles don't go away. So, if you look at Brother Barker's book, Barker and Bolton, Apocalypse and History, and who's got that? Have a read of it. It's a really good book. Really good book. So, commute to London from Abbey Wood, so I read 2 or 3 times to get my head into it. What they argue Brother Boat, as you know, was a very well-known archaeologist, historian. Brother Barker was reader of geography at Southampton University. So they wrote a book, it's a pretty good book. What they said was that these three spirits of the French Revolution manifested themselves in two competing ways, socialism and nationalism, which have shaped the world. Right? Liberty, equality and fraternity got translated into socialism and nationalism. So not only did the French Revolution open up human rights, it also paved the way for the modern nation state. But what is interesting to me is that Heket, the goddess of birth, has presided over the birth of nations, because that's what it's called. In the Victorian era, this phenomena of empires being broken up and nation states coming into existence was called the period of the birth of nations. The midwife, Heket, the spirit of the French Revolution. How old is Germany? 150 years old, that's all. How old is Italy? 150 years old. How old is Belgium? Less than that. How old is Holland? These are new countries. They were created at the end of the 1800s as empires, the Spanish Empire, French Empire, and so on. So fell apart. Holy Roman Empire fell apart. Look what it says. How interesting is this? Verse 14 of chapter 16. They are the spirits of demons working miracles which go forth unto the kings of the earth and of the whole world. They go forth to the kings of the earth. So nation states have come into existence. Empires have dried up. And they're gathering together the nations of the world to Armageddon. Look, it happens, a test case. The river Euphrates dried up. What happened in the area of the river Euphrates, the Turkish Empire? Nationalism. Which countries were formed in the old territory of the Turkish Empire? Israel. Jordan. Lebanon. Iran. Syria. Saudi Arabia. Kuwait. Nationalism occurred. The spirit of the French Revolution even got into the Ottoman Empire and broke it up. That's what happened. With the dates of when these countries came into existence. The Turkish Empire dried up and the spirit of the French Revolution got into it. So now you can have a war between Kuwait and Iraq. Now you can have Syria inviting Russia in to help it. You can have all this now because nation states have been created out of the space created by the empires. I've lost track of time. So out of the French Revolution came, most celebratedly, the Declaration des droits de l'homme, the Declaration of the Rights of Man. And that is defining our modern world. And we've got a lot to be grateful for. It allows us religious freedom. It allows us not to be subservient to the Pope. It allows us to be Christadelphians. You know, there was a law in Britain that Unitarians were outlawed. Right until the blasphemy law was rescinded, it was an offence to contradict the Trinity in this country. The blasphemy law was rescinded relatively recently. We've been freed from that. It's paved the way for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of the United Nations. And if you look in Revelation chapter 16, verse 14, how amazing is this? These are the spirits that demons work in miracles, which go forth into the kings of the earth and of the whole world. It's not just the kings of the earth. The kings of the earth are the kings of Europe. The kings of the earth are the kings which fight against the Lord Jesus Christ when he comes. If you go to Revelation 19 verse 19, it says, I saw the beast and the kings of the earth. Right? This is the 10 whole powers of Europe fighting against the Lord Jesus Christ. So it gathers the kings of the earth, but it also says, and of the whole habitable, ecumene. It gathers all the nations of the world. So this spirit goes from France, not just through Europe, but to the United Nations of the world. What an amazing phenomenon. The declaration, men are born free and remain free and equal in rights. As I say, there's a lot to be thankful for that came in. But the problem is putting that into practice. And what is left out of that? God. God. Because it assumes, doesn't it, that there is no accountability at all to God. Because they got rid of the Catholic Church, that's fine. But they've got rid of God as well. It's just about human thinking, humanism. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, is it really anything to do with the French Revolution, just with a similar name? If you photograph that. Well, do you know who penned the Declaration of Human Rights? He was a Jew. He was Jewish. A survivor of Holocaust. And René Cassin. And he drafted, for which he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. How interesting is it to take the Jewish sort of heritage to shape that. Because there's a lot of good things in these documents which do reflect principles that you could find in Scripture, except that they've been detached from God. They've been sort of taken and surrounded man's thinking. It's about us. It's just about us. This is what we read about René and his declaration. It was influenced by the Code Napoleon. He saw it as a Greek temple. Greek philosophy, French flair. That's where it came from. I didn't cover this. But it was controversial, and the controversy points up what we've just been saying. The first controversy to resolve was related to the very origin of human rights. Basically, the discussion between the supporters of the concept of natural rights and positive rights. In other words, some said, we only have rights because God has given us rights. And others who said, no, evolution has given us rights. Or, well, nobody gives us rights, we just agree what they are. See, without God, what's a right? Now, how does evolution give you rights? Evolution works on the survival of the strongest, right? Tough lad, you're not as strong as me. Rights, I'll take them, thank you very much. You are stronger than me. Yeah? What? Rights don't come into it, do they? You know, you can see this little line going up to the carcass going, oh wait, Dad, I've got a right to this one. No rights at all. Survival of the fittest. And if you haven't got God, where are you going to get any rights at all? There's no grounding of rights. There's no. Where's the concept of rights come from? And yet, that's the world is shaped by. And it's gone into the European Charter. The Lisbon Treaty embodied rights and values. What's that sound like? Freedom, solidarity, security into the European Union. Right? The freedoms, political, economic and social freedom. So, from the United Nations then into the European Union, the mouth of the beast speaks 3 unclean spirits like frogs. Right? It's written into the Charter of Europe. UN Chronicle, International Human Rights. The traditional categorization of human rights into 3 generations comes from the cry of the French Revolution. Right? The United Nations admits that's where it gets its concepts from, the French Revolution. This is exactly what we are talking about here. And what does the human rights body of the United Nations do? This is amazing. It dedicates itself to criticizing Israel. United Nations human rights selectively targets Israel above everyone else. Now, what would you expect from Revelation chapter 16? That these unclean spirits, like frogs, gather the nations of Europe and of the whole world to where?
Armageddon.
To Armageddon, in the Hebrew tongue. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? Absolutely amazing. So, the world is now a small place. The unclean spirits like frogs get everywhere. It's called globalization. The world has changed beyond all recognition to an older generation. We can go anywhere, we can speak to anyone, anytime. We can view whatever we want, however disgusting and obnoxious it is to God. It can be there in our bedrooms. We can just cannot get away from it. If you don't want to get away from it, you don't have to get away from it, wherever you are. That's the world of Revelation chapter 16, verse 13 and 14. Now you tell me it doesn't affect the way you and I live our lives. There's no effect upon me. It's not in my house. It's not in my head. I'm completely independent of any influence like this. Nothing I say has got any subconscious forces shaping it. I'm completely free of that. I am pristine. Anyone going to argue that?
Everything I'm fine.
Now we think you would be deluded, should you say that? We think you had an unclean spirit in your head. So what we have to do for the rest of our time together is really work on what these unclean spirits mean in our lives and recognizing the shape and form they take and the dangers they pose and what practical things can we do to avoid them commanding us. And what can we do if we've got young children, or maybe, God willing, we'll have children? How do we decide about education? If we've got teenagers, and we've got teenagers, what do we decide about phone use? If we've got ecclesias and youth groups, how do we help people understand how to handle these forces? How do we prepare people into the workplace where they may have to lose their job rather than have their conscience defiled? These are real issues. Young sister working in McDonald's, not in that country, in another country, at a gathering last year, she perhaps says, I may be losing my job soon. Why? Because they want me to embrace something I can't embrace. She said, I'll tolerate it. I'm not going to throw bricks at anybody. But McDonald's is changing its policy from tolerance to embrace it. And I'm not going to embrace anything like that. I'm not going to sign up to embrace it, so I may be redundant. But that young sister, teenager, I think she was. What a faithful perspective to have. We may have to strengthen one another to stand up and be counted in these last days. So that's what we need to think about. And it will be an answer, when the Lord Jesus Christ comes. Does he recognize us as one of his? And if so, then there's a wonderful hope of a kingdom to come.